Okay.
And go right
View
there.
the original record. It's the 1920 census.
Yeah.
Population of Bridgeport City. So it's Connecticut?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Okay, so now here's a Stanley Sudeikis with a misspelling, and his wife barely can read that.
I think it might be Mill.
Yeah, so this is 1920. Well then, so he had two? He had two families?
Okay, so you were interested in finding more information about your grandfather.
Yeah.
So what we found was a marriage record for your great-grandfather.
Okay. Also named Stanley Sudeikis. The age of 22 years old, and Miss Michalina, am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Michalina. I believe this is like Bielskis, which we'd seen this name before.
Yes.
Now we knew her
yes.
as Emma.
Well, I think people change their names.
Sure.
Americanize their names.
Right.
And so I think that's probably what happened in this situation.
She was ahead of her time. Emma's a very popular name these days. Yeah. This was the 11th August, 1914, and there's his signature. Well, I guess Stanley Sr. and Emma have at least my grandfather. I wonder if they had any other kids.
Well, this is 1914, so I think that the next place to look is in the census and go to 1920 and see what's happening with the family.
Right.
If we can go to Ancestry.com, go down to Census and Voter Lists.
Yep.
We are looking for the 1920 census.
Bingo. Stanley. Location?
Location.
Chicago, Cook, Illinois, USA. Bingo. So here we go. All right, so we have 3 people listed on this address. Emma Sudeikis, another common misspelling. And then we have a son, Stanley.
Yeah.
He's 4.5 at this point. Walter. Here's a Walter Bilkey. So he's the head of the household. Emma is a sister. Okay, so Walter is Stanley's uncle.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Where's Stanley Sr.? She listed as married? She is listed as...
She's listed as married. She's not listed as widowed.
Right. There's no Stanley Sr. listed here at all. Interesting. Maybe they divorced. Where do you think we could find where Stanley Sr. would be?
We go back to the census.
Okay.
Go to edit
search. Wonderful.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah, take both of those out.
Oh, both.
Yeah.
Okay.
And go right there.
View the original record. It's the 1920 census. Population of Bridgeport City. So it's Connecticut? Yeah, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Okay, so now here's a Stanley Sudeikis with a misspelling, and his wife barely can read that.
I think it might be Mill.
Yeah, so this is 1920. Well then, so he had two families? So in 1920, my grandfather, Stanley Jr., lived in Chicago with my great-grandmother, Emma, but for some reason, my great-grandfather, Stanley Sr., was not living with them. Now, the crazy thing is, I've also found a 1920 census from Connecticut that shows a man named Stanley Sudeikis living in Bridgeport with a woman named Mill. Now, is the Stanley Sudeikis in Connecticut the same man as my great-grandfather, Stanley Sr. in Chicago? Emma and Stanley's marriage record hopefully will give me some more information on Stanley Sr., which could then help me find out if these two Stanleys are actually, you know, really the same guy. Sudeikis and Bielskis, Philium, Joseph, and Mariana Gesheta are my great-great-grandparents. My father's middle name, I mean, that's what he went by, was Daniel Joseph Sudeikis. Interesting. I don't think my father would know that Joseph was the family name, especially if it came from the Sudeikis side. But it suits him better than Marianne. Daniel Marianne Sudeikis. That's not horrible.
Hi.
Hi.
So you found the document?
Yeah, we found it right here.
I heard back from the county clerk's office.
Right.
There is no record of a divorce.
Okay. Then what I have to find out now, if the Stanley that we have the marriage record of here is the same Stanley that's also married with a family in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Yep.
All right.
Since you indicated that you found a 1920 census record showing that Stanley Sudeikis Sr. was married, why don't we look in these books to see if we can find a marriage record for him here in Bridgeport? Why don't you start with the 1918 records?
Okay.
I'll take the records from 1919. We'll see if we can find a record there that'll be helpful.
All right.
Each one of these books has an index in the front.
Here we go. Stanley Sudeikis, 298. This is
298.
1918. All right. We got town of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Groom's name, Stanley Sudeikis. Bride's name, Amalia Jacaitis.
Looks like tracheitis.
Tracheitis.
Probably.
Birthplace, Lithuania. Listed as his first marriage. Then it's not him. Or he's lying. Name of father, Joseph. Well, the father's name is correct. It was Joseph.
Name of mother is Mary Gash.
That's not the name I remember. From the marriage record, we had the names Joseph and Mary Gasheta.
Mary Gasheta. Mary Gash may be an anglicized version of her name.
Mm-hmm. So wait a minute. Joseph and Mary?
Joseph and Mary.
Are you trying to tell me that I'm related to Jesus? That's his signature there. Well, I do have a marriage application from Chicago with the signature. The T into A to the N, very, very similar.
I think there's enough similarity between these two signatures to think that these are one and the same men.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the information all, makes sense, aside from him living in Chicago and being married to my great-grandmother. That's the only information that's drastically different. But yeah, I mean, bigamy feels a little bit, a little odd. You know, I don't know what to make of it. I would hope that it was a mutual decision. I'd hate to think that he just hightailed it out of Chicago. So then, how do we find out more about, what these young kids ended up doing?
Why don't we go to the 1930 census for Bridgeport and see what kind of information that holds about Stanley and his family?
Yeah.
So let's go to Ancestry.com.
So this is 1930. I've looked at the 1921. So here we are in, is that Greenfield Hill?
Greenfield Hill.
Oops.
That would be the next town over from
Gotcha.
Bridgeport.
So we have Stanley Sudeikis, Amelia, wife, and then daughter. We have a daughter named Julia.
Daughter named Julia.
They own
This was a $4,600 house that they own.
Stanley they had listed as a gardener at a private estate. So they were owning property and doing just fine with him gardening.
It said a lot that he was able to afford a house in that area.
Mm-hmm. So he was conducting himself in a, we can assume, in a gentlemanly fashion. They probably don't know about the family in Chicago.
They probably don't.
Yeah.
No.
You would think Stanley Sr. would have as much concern for his son and wife in Chicago as you would hope, as he would his wife and daughter here in Connecticut. It certainly allows myself to be a little bit more understanding for why my grandfather, Stanley Jr., would have left my grandmother and my own father. If he didn't know life with a father, then he may not have realized the importance of that role.